So welcome everyone again. It is lovely to see you all for our second this year CHME Doctoral Students webinar. Just to remind you, CHME stands for the Council for Hospitality Management Education, and as one of CHME's priorities, we really want to, or CHME really wants to engage with the PGRs, early career researchers, and this is on research methodologies in particular. And today's session is specifically looking at impact. And I'm really pleased to see that there's quite a lot of interest in the session. So thank you to those of you who joined. And for those of you who are watching the recording, I hope you find this session useful. So our presenter today is Alisha Ali, who is the chair of the Council for Hospitality Management Education. But Alisha is also the Associate Professor in Hospitality and Tourism and Head of Research Degrees in the College of Social Sciences and Arts at Sheffield Hallam University. Alisha is an interdisciplinary researcher, and she specializes in the intersection of sustainability, technology, and education. She's particularly passionate about bridging the gap between academia and industry through developing evidence-based and practical solutions that address real-world challenges. And I think it is fair to say that Alisha is a perfect speaker for today's session, trying to give us more insights on how we can move beyond our research and into impact. So Alisha, thank you again for agreeing to lead this session, and over to you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Marie. And thank you all so much for joining me here today on today's session on Beyond the Thesis. So when I was putting together today's session, the question that I reflected on when I was doing my doctorate many, many years ago was, can my doctorate change the world? And I think when we start our doctorates, we always go in with this intention of wanting to change the world or, create huge impact as a result of our doctorates. And it's for us to really step back and think carefully around what is the purpose of our research and, how are we using that doctorate to create impact? And what about future impact, not just from the doctorate, but beyond the doctorate? Some of you might be undertaking professional doctorates, a DBA or an EdD or a DProf in social sciences, where your contribution has to be towards practice. So you have a different kind of impact built in there. And if you're on the PhD route, you're looking at your sort of contribution to theory or knowledge in terms of where that impact comes from. But if you're thinking about the doctorate and you're thinking about the thesis, let's think about that question I started from at the start. Can your doctorate change the world? And I'm going to show you a couple of photographs. And let me know if you know any of these three people. Do you recognize any of these photos? Anybody wants to shout out who they recognize from these photos and what they think they've contributed to? No one?
Well, Albert
Michaela,
Einstein.
yes.
Albert Einstein.
Yes, great.
And obviously the theory of relativity, so physics.
Yes, excellent. So Albert Einstein, the middle photographed, he finished his PhD in 1906, and actually that's the most cited ever PhD. On the left, we have Marie Curie. She finished her PhD in 1903. It was on radioactive substances. She won a Nobel Prize for her discoveries. And again, what's quite interesting about her PhD is that her thesis and papers are still kept in a lead-lined box because they are too radioactive to be actually touched safely. But we're quite well aware of these scholars. The scholar on the right, W.E.B. Du Bois, he was the first African-American to obtain a PhD from Harvard. And he focused on the suppression of the African slave trade to the US. And his work actually laid the foundation for modern sociology and the study of race in America. So these scholars, again, through their doctoral work, they were able to set up foundational pillars afterwards to actually make huge impacts. If we think more towards our discipline, do you recognize any of these names of any of these scholars in hospitality and tourism? And what type of work they've done in the field? Any of these names seem familiar to you?
Yeah, John Ari.
Yep. And what is John Ari known for, anybody?
Demetrius?
The gaze, tourist
The gaze, the tourist gaze, yes. So
Yes.
John's, really good contribution on the tourist gaze. Somebody said they recognize Demetrius' contribution.
Yes, from Bournemouth University.
And on digital tourism, e-tourism, that's his area. Richard Butler, tourism area life cycle. I think we all would have studied that in our introductory modules in hospitality and tourism. Oliana Poon, known for the old versus new tourists. She wrote a book back in the mid-1980s, Tourism Technology, Competitive Strategies, which was sort of first identifying how technology was going to shift tourists from being the sort of new tourists, very tech focused. John Ury, we recognize. Philip Pearce, tourist behavior. Again, some of the foundational work on tourist behavior. Mariana Segala, digital tourism, works in the same field similar to Demetrius. Lise Tussadere at University of Surrey on, again, digital tourism, digital transformation, AI in service context. Conrad Lashley, again, hospitality studies. Peter Lugosi, he takes a very sociological, geography, and anthropological approach in looking at how we understand hospitality, tourism, and events. So these are all, exciting scholars in a field who've made significant impact because of their research, but it started foundationally with their doctorates, and then it's thinking about how they've used that to help position or move their work forward. Now, one of the things I want to say is that when you finish a doctorate, your doctorate might not be highly cited. So having a highly cited doctorate is not the norm. Compared to Einstein, who has the most highly cited doctorate ever, our doctorates might not be quite highly cited. I looked up my doctorate before this webinar today, and it only has 12 citations in all of the time it has been in the public domain. So we're not going to have high cited doctorates, but it's thinking about how the academic contribution or that professional contribution from your doctorate can lead you to have future societal impact, and how you start to build that into your doctoral research from now. That's what I really wanted us to concentrate on today. So what I think about impact is I talk about thinking about it from dreaming to reality, because as I started off saying, we have these big dreams that our PhDs are going to change the world when we start off. We have this problem or issue, or you see this gap in the literature, and we think we're going to solve it with our doctorate. And it's thinking about how that dream actually become a reality. And this was one of the questions which was actually posed before the event today in terms of what is impact and how do you define impact. Well, according to the Economic and Social Research Council, you can categorize impact as an academic impact. But what we want to also think about is the economic and societal impact, because impact is more than just disseminating our research through an article, a journal publication, or a conference proceeding. It's about thinking how we use that research and use that knowledge to benefit people from it. And it's a two-way relationship between yourself as the producer of the knowledge and the people who actually use the knowledge. Sometimes in academia, we tend to stick with the academic impact, thinking about how we are making a contribution to method, to theory across our disciplines. But it's to think a little bit deeper in terms of what is that economic and or societal impact. So how are we making that broader contribution? What is that deeper contribution to policy, to society, to the economy, to the environment, to education, to technology? And I think a more deeper question we need to be asking ourselves is, how do we actually know that research has created an impact? So what are the knowledge benefits which are coming from the research? How do we know that that research is changing or influencing others? And how can we actually evidence that impact? And I'll give you some tips around how we can do that as we move through today's session. But it's thinking about your research in terms of what is the academic impact that my research is having, but also what is the economic or societal impact. So where are those impacts coming from? And I think the thing to also be mindful of is we are in social sciences, and our impact can take a lot longer than people who are probably studying engineering or in health sciences or medical sciences, because they can probably see their impact a bit quicker, because they might be, developing a drug, testing a drug. So they might see their impact a lot quicker than us in social sciences, because what we are fundamentally looking at is people, society, culture, communities, ways of work, lifestyle. These are the type of topics we are really digging deep into social sciences, and hence, is not to think that our research doesn't have an impact. It's just our impact can be a little bit slower to achieve. So, but it's also to remember that our impact is still quite significant. So what I want to focus on next is thinking about the different ways we can actually get to impact. And there's a few suggestions that I have up here, and feel free to add in other suggestions that you think that can actually help you get your project, your research to impact. And it's to think about this whole process of knowledge translation. Where is that process between you creating knowledge and those who are using the knowledge? So impact is that change between the creation and the using. How do you get people to use the knowledge you're creating? And there are several routes to impact. We have knowledge exchange, which is where you bring together researchers, users of the researchers, and wider groups and community to exchange ideas, expertise. So for example, you might have an idea which is founded on an academic gap, but you want to test that. So you might create, conversations with the industry that you focus your research on, in terms of, is that really a valid thing to look at, or is that of relevance to the industry? So it's thinking about that knowledge exchange. It's also thinking about how your research might be able to shape policy. So again, if you get some time, the government actually has published what is known as their areas of research interest, and hence you can actually see what is the government priorities in terms of policy development, and then you can have a look to see if your research actually is, can be used to shape those different policies that the government are looking into. The government also, as part of their engagement with academia, also put out calls for evidence on different topics. A few years ago, I contributed evidence on sustainability and how they were looking at sustainable tourism development. So again, that's where you could actually feed into your research in terms of the different calls for evidence as part of the different committees that they have as part of that. So I think it's thinking about policy as quite a route where you can use that academic research, because the government is quite keen, particularly in the UK. I'm only speaking from a UK context in terms of the government, because I don't have knowledge of what happens with other governments. But from a UK context, they're quite keen to connect academia to policy research. And then those areas of research interest are really important in terms of how they use that research. The government also has a site called Octopus. It's not the energy company in the UK. It's a different site called Octopus, where actually you can publish your research. So you can publish a short briefing note on your research. You can put out an abstract about your research. And then again, that's in the government's database to help them think about how they can come to you potentially as a policy maker when they're looking at how they connect industry, academia, and policy research together. So your research can have a huge impact on policy engagement and policy development. Partnerships, again, with business, with industry, with healthcare. So again, if you're looking at things like grant funding, or looking at things like how you can get your research, to shape or impact communities or societies, is thinking about who are your key partners in your research. So it's not just thinking about, I'm going to, have some interviews with hoteliers. What does that mean, and what is the meaning of that research with those hoteliers, and how can I have meaningful partnership with those hoteliers to disseminate the research, but also enable those hoteliers to benefit from the research? That's where you get true partnership taking place. It's also about public involvement and public engagement. So think about things like the Economic and Social Research Council here in the UK has a Festival of Social Sciences, where it's an event for us in academia to be able to share and communicate our research with the broader public. So it's thinking about how you can also share and communicate your research with public audiences. And this could be through things or mechanisms like the Conversation, which publishes academic research, but in a very conversational format of no more than 800 words for the public. It could also be things like you using your LinkedIn in very different ways to actually share notes or briefs around your research to be able to get users involved with your research. So that's quite important to think about. think about participatory research. Again, is how are you involving your participants in your research? Are you just having a one-time interaction with them, or are you having more interaction with your participants? So for example, a lot of research now tend to have an advisory group to look at, the methods, if the methods align, to look at the impact of the research and how you can actually create user benefits. So it's thinking about how you participate in with your users in that research. Again, your route to impact, depending on what you're working on, could actually be commercialized. Again, we tend to see that more in different disciplines, but nothing prevents us from creating something that can be commercialized. It could be, a different approach to leadership. It could be a training session. It could be something which we can commercialize, which is, again, a route to impact. And then the last one is thinking about access. So how are you making sure your research is accessible to the wider audiences? So it's really thinking about, that process of knowledge translation where you are looking at the middle ground between this is the knowledge I'm creating, these are the people who might use it, what is that impact? So what is that change that's happening there to be able to create that impact? So the next thing I want to focus on is on design and impact. And I'm going to spend a bit of time on this in terms of how we can actually start to think about design and impact. So the first thing is to think about your audience. And this is not just the people who will read your doctorate, but the people you want to read your doctorate. Many times your supervisors will tell you the only people going to read your doctorate are your supervisors and your examiners. But you want more people to read your doctorate. You want more people to know about the research you are doing. So how do you actually get to know your audience? So think about it as a mapping exercise to understand your community of users in terms of who are your key stakeholders in your project. So what is that going to look like in terms of a stakeholder mapping? So it's thinking about who are your potential users and identifying how these users have interest and influence in your work. That's quite important for you to think about. So if I can give you some examples, my PhD many moons ago, I wouldn't tell you how long I have it. I'm graduated, but my PhD looked at how destinations can use technology to make themselves more sustainable. So a key user for my research was destination managers. So they were quite important in terms of my stakeholder analysis. And I really wanted them to read my research because I interviewed them. So I saw them as partners in my research, but I also wanted them to be able to use the research to help them to start to engage with technology beyond marketing, to actually think about how they can actually use this to make their destinations more sustainable. So one of the things I did for myself was in that stakeholder mapping, identify the types of destinations that will be more amenable to reading the research. Is it larger destinations, attractions? Is it island destinations? So because destinations can be defined so broadly. So it was really scaling down in terms who are the destinations I can have these conversations with, in terms of letting them become aware of my sort of contribution, which was a toolkit of tools they can use for different kinds of sustainability, and then having conversations with them in terms of you are a key stakeholder. This research is meant to support you in the transition to sustainability. Here are some of the tools that can be used for you. So it's really thinking about the who you want to read the work, not just the people who have to read your doctorate, but who do you want in terms of that stakeholder analysis and that stakeholder mapping. That's quite important for you to start to think about. The second thing is thinking about how you start to engage your audience. Now, if you're thinking about postdoctorate or during your doctorate, to think about applying for grants for funding, most research council in your funding application will ask you about user engagement as part of the project bid. So you need to really think about who are those users and how you're actually going to engage, because engagement and dissemination is quite a key part of grant application. And this goes beyond the traditional publication route of conferences, journal papers, etc. They want to see more innovative ways of how you can reach larger populations of people who are part of your audience. And I think it's quite good here when you're thinking about engaging your audience and to think about the different modes of knowledge production. Saunders in 2019, if you look at the text, they have the 3 modes of knowledge production from 0 to 3. So mode 0 is what they describe as power and patronage. Is basically where, you know, you have a grant and you or something like a grant, and basically the knowledge is created for the funder of the grant. So you have very little flexibility on that. Mode 1 is what we call academic interest. So we've gone away, we've read the literature, and we've identified a nice gap in the literature. So it's of academic interest. So you're looking at a sort of disciplined, traditional type of an investigation, very academic oriented. But what we should really be moving to is mode 2 knowledge, which is industry engaged, where we're looking at how we translate that academic knowledge, so the rigor behind that academic knowledge, to something which is of value to industry, or we start the conversation with industry. What are the challenges? What are the issues that you have in, or I don't like to use the word challenges or opportunities. I prefer, or problems. I prefer the word opportunities. So what are the opportunities that, you know, are there for academic research, which can help your organization? So it's how we problematize with industry, and then we use the academic rigor in that mode 2 of knowledge. So I think it's, you know, thinking about the different levels of knowledge production and how you can actually start to engage your audience in terms of, you know, the kinds of knowledge that they're seeking and how you can help them deliver that. When you work with industry, as many of you would have, sometimes they want things quite quick. Sometimes they want things with quantity, like surveys, numbers, etc. But again, it's how you have that careful dialogue with them in terms of, you know, saying that you're going to be giving them the academic rigor to be able to help them solve or look at the opportunities that are existing in their business. I think that's really important to think about. The other thing is, after you think about engaging with your audience, is thinking about how you build and document your impact evidence. So how are we starting to document our impact evidence? And there's 3 things you would want to look at here, which is very similar to what you would look at also for the methodology chapter of your doctorate, is the robustness of your evidence. So do you have robust evidence? So if you're doing a questionnaire, is your sample size large enough, and is your sample size representative enough? Is your data analysis rigorous to be able to document the impact? So it's thinking about the robustness of your methods in terms of how you build and document that evidence. It's also thinking about the significance. So are you providing evidence of significance to have societal impact and or economic impact? So what is the significance of what you're providing? So statistical evidence is not always enough sometimes. What are you adding or contributing to that? And I think that's where we can make a great contribution as qualitative researchers in social science, is by adding to the qualitative evidence, by giving the voice of the participants, because many of us are probably doing research where we're giving the voice or the lived experience or trying to understand a phenomena in a different context. So what is that robust level of evidence, and how significant is that evidence, and how are you using that to document your impact? And the third thing in building and documenting your evidence is thinking about the timeliness or the relevancy of that. So is it addressing a policy question, or is it addressing an industry need, or is it addressing a societal challenge? That's important to think about. And are my findings going to be coming in a timely manner? So that significance actually is quite, you know, important to think about. One of the, if I can give an example again from my research, you know, doing some research at the moment on toxic personalities in hotels. Toxic personalities, as I define it, is incivility in the workplace. So it's looking at, you know, not deviance, which is usually addressed through the law, like harassment, bullying, etc., but incivil behavior that just contributes to growing well-being challenges in the workplace. But again, for me, is that question timely? Yes, because we're seeing again the rise of people having time off work for mental health. We are also seeing the precarious work in hospitality We also seeing people leaving the industry to go to other industries, so some age-old problems are still there. And part of that challenge is around the incivility in the workplace, not those sort of really people-focused culture which exists in some of our workplaces. And that could be due for a number of reasons. So for me, focusing on that issue means, it's relevant because this is an ongoing issue that we've been having for a while, which addresses a lot of things like the issue of turnover, the issue of precarious work, the issue of, many workers who are vulnerable tend to come and work in hospitality industry, increasing that level of incivility. So there's a lot of things tied up into this. So it's thinking about, that relevance, but also how do I make that relevance significant and robust in order to give evidence back to the industry. So it's thinking about, again, how you build and how you document and your evidence impact. That's going to be quite important for you. The other thing to think about is how you actually communicate what that impact is. So is thinking about how are you communicating the outcomes? How are you establishing, for example, if you're doing quants, you could even do this with qualitative research, how are you establishing causality or attribution of what are the factors? And how do you actually communicate that your evidence is convincing? That's really important to think about. So it's, again, going back to the point of knowing your audience and then what are the mechanisms to be able to communicate with your audience. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to read any of the policy briefs that the government puts out, but they're quite comprehensive, quite short documents because, again, the users of those documents need information which is quite short, precise, to the point, so they're able to make decisions. And again, it's thinking about how you're going to be communicating your evidence in that way, because we can't be giving, our users who we want to read the research an 80,000 thesis. It's thinking about how we break that down into a shorter version for them to be able to help them understand the benefits of your research. And then the last one is around how you're going to evaluate your impact and how you're going to sustain your impact. So it's not just around creating the impact, but it's thinking about how we're going to keep sustaining. So what are we learning in that knowledge translation process, that process from when we create our contribution to when we actually share it with our users? What are we learning from that process? What is working with our impact? What hasn't worked so well? What relationships are working well? And how are we going to achieve success in terms of making sure we measure our impact going forward? So these are some key points I think we should all note to think about how we actually start to build and design our impact. And I'm going to give you a few examples of work from myself and colleagues to just show you how they actually start to use what I call buzzwords or keywords to help you start to frame or to start to write your impact. This is one from a colleague of mine who works on net zero and different types of activities. So they say what their work investigates. So my work investigates how sociological insight can enrich cultural practice and societal well-being in hospitality. That sentence is quite important because it sort of clearly states what the work is about, but what the impact is in terms of well-being, because that's quite a contemporary issue in the industry right now. So through working with food organizations, she's helped them connect research with practice and policy, and then how the research has the potential to contribute to food development initiatives, again, contributing to net zero. So two big policy issues are being identified there, net zero and well-being, and their work is focusing on how they connect the policy and practice by working with local food organizations. So you see they've identified their community of users there in terms of how they actually go away to design their impact. This is an example of a piece of research that I've done a while ago. So the premise for this, as I said, research and technology in hospitality and tourism education has traditionally been dominated by its use in teaching and learning. So how we use it to teach and support students with their learning. But using my expertise, I'm showing what my expertise in terms of technology for sustainable tourism. I'm reimagining how we can use this existing knowledge to help students develop sustainability knowledge in the classroom. So my contribution is looking at sustainability as an employability skill. And hence, for me, this opens up conversations with employers in terms of looking at the direction of what are the key skills needed for graduates. Because sustainability is always talked about. We always talk about sustainability in different versions, but our employers actually looking for students when they come into industry to be demonstrating the qualities of being sustainable. So again, this is where my audience was in terms of looking at the future of skills for hospitality and tourism employees and graduates in terms of that. So it's thinking about how you start to write your impact examples for yourself to be able to showcase that. So this is where I hand over to you in terms of letting you start to think about how you design your impact. So I want you to think about the aim of your research, and I want you to think about how you can write that aim differently for 3 different audiences. So you write your aim for academics, write your aim for policymakers to the government, and write your aim for entrepreneurs. And think about if you are writing your aim in the same way, or if you're going to actually write it differently. And in writing your aim, think about what is the story you are telling via your aim? What does your audience really need to know about your aim? And what language are you going to use to tell the story of your research? And by language, I mean, are you going to be using heavy academic terms, or are you going to be using industry language, or are you going to be using different forms of words to be able to get your message across? So I'm going to give you around 10 minutes to do that. So we're set 8 past the hour, so 18 past. If we can regroup, and it will be great to hear you share some of your aims in terms of if you wrote it differently and how did you convey your aim for your different audience. I think in doing that, go back to, I'll put this slide up back, is thinking about how you design your audience. So who are your audience? How do you engage your audience? How you build and document your impact evidence? How you communicate and how you evaluate and sustain? Think about these 5 points when you start to write your aim for these 3 different audiences. Are we all okay with this? Yeah, perfect. Okay, so we are at 18 minutes past the hour. I'm going to stop sharing. Let me stop presenting just to see, how you all got on with that task. Anybody wants to share? Did you find it difficult, easy? How was it? You could use a chat if you don't want to speak. Yeah.
I'm happy to start.
Yes, please.
So in terms of academics, one of the aim that I was thinking is to show how experiential sustainability education build a transformative ethos in tourism, hospitality, and event students. The language I would use, it would use a pedagogic terms that speaks directly, resonates with lecturers, and according to the area of research, it would satisfy different the different aims. If I were, on the other hand, to look at the policy, I would rewrite the aim as to demonstrate work integrated sustainability training can deliver scalable green skills for the future THE workforce. So the focus is no longer on pedagogical provisions, but is more on the implication on a policy levels, with the clear guidelines how this can be implemented and who's the stakeholders are and to what level are the stakeholders involved. If on the other hand, I was thinking about the industry, I could envisage to provide a practical, I don't know. It's important to give a time frame. So 3 months, 90 days, experiential toolkit that helps THE businesses reduce cost, reduce carbon, and enhance guest experience, as those are relevant for the industry, resilience, and financial resilience and sustainability resilience. And the language would be would provide a clear measure how this could be achieved and what the results are, and the implications in terms of cost and investment, considering the industry thin profit margin.
Excellent. Did you try it for entrepreneurs, Dimitri?
Yeah, that'll be the last one.
The last one.
Yeah, that when I well, in my understanding, industry would be entrepreneurs as well as business owners.
So I think you've done really well there. Is probably think about how you could probably make it a bit more concise. So like for the industry, I think you're talking about how they build a resilient workforce.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes.
So I think, it's probably, using some of their buzzwords that they currently have in their practice is, my work can help you build a resilient workforce by doing this, and you will see results, or, I will have this for you in 3 to 6 months. So that really changes how you engage with your users, but it also is changing the communication in terms of the user audience. Yeah, exciting. Well done. Thank you for being the first one to share. Anybody
You're
else
welcome.
wants to share? We have a quiet audience here.
If I may,
Victoria. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Dimitri. Victoria wants to go next. Do you want to just add something quick before Victoria starts?
yes, absolutely. Just very quickly, while we were waiting for people to start, I could see the three aims. I mean, that also we wouldn't want to complicate things, but the three aims are synergetic in the sense that they could easily come together, as there is a before, a during, and after, and so they could not only be part of a research, but I could see potential. I mean, in theory, there could be an interest to follow how this would manifest in reality, considering it would be on a longitudinal research project. That's all. Thank you. Sorry.
No, I think that's showing the knowledge translation process we spoke about earlier. So it's how you translating that from, your sort of academic knowledge to the impact. That's the process you're going through with your 3 aims. Well done. Thank you. Victoria, you wanted to share?
Yeah, thanks. I found it really useful because I'm in health. So I'm speech and language therapist. So I'm looking at early language support. And so I initially was like, no, entrepreneurism isn't anything to do with me. But actually, it was really useful to think about, because I think if you expand that definition of what is an entrepreneur, there are, for example, publishers of like language support resources. They could be coming up with things and they'd be interested in impact and scale and cost and things like that. So the entrepreneur one was much less familiar territory for me, but useful. So yeah, I basically just said up to 1 in 17 children have DLD. So this is a language disorder affecting well-being, attainment. Caregivers and professionals offer insights into low-cost, high-impact models of early language support that can offer lifelong impact on outcomes. So it was kind of about, that sort of bang for buck in terms of the things that people would find most useful. So yeah, I thought that was a really useful exercise. Thank you.
I think, with the entrepreneurs, I know sometimes we're not entrepreneurial in our nature, but it's thinking, if I were to ask for funding for this research, what would the entrepreneur get back? If you're giving me 50K, 100K to continue this research, what are they going to get back? What is their business going to get back? And I think that's when you start to see how you can start, earlier in the session, I had this different ways you can engage with knowledge. So whether you can have like a knowledge exchange project or a policy engagement project or a partnership, or you working with public, is sort of thinking about that. And if you're also thinking about postdoctoral research, many of the postdoctoral fellowships tend to focus on the next steps of your doctorate. So what it is that you're doing from your doctorate to be able to create the impact, and how are you going to communicate that impact? So it could be, a toolkit.
Yeah.
And then how are you going to create that toolkit? So then you're looking at your participation and your users to help you create that toolkit and then test it with users and then have something workable. So it's really started to think about not just in the doctorate right now, but also the next steps in terms of what's going to happen post-doctorate. We have some hands up. Hilna, sorry, did I pronounce it correct?
No, Helena.
Tell me how to pronounce it, sorry.
It's okay, Helena.
Helena, yes.
Yeah. So actually it is a proposal I submitted, but yeah, these are 3 different aspects, honestly. So I think that in my proposal, it's about war tourism and war cinematography. And if we differentiate between academic impact policy makers, impact for policymakers and for entrepreneurs, it would be different from the possible potential outcomes. So, of course, for academia, it would be a better understanding of ethical guidelines and ethical dilemmas very often on organizing, completing, the mission of war photography and war documentary, let's say, of any kind, with participants, potential objects which are going to be filmed or interviewed. And it will, I hope it will help understanding the media studies and dark tourism, conflict-related tourism in terms of concepts. But for policymaking, and for policymaking that's interesting. For war tourism, I would say, for policymaking, and as well as organizing events, because these are cultural events where these projects are being shown, case studies are demonstrated. It might mean guidelines, which would include ethical considerations, which would also have guidelines on how to interpret and how to balance between truth-telling, ethical, let's say, sensitivity of the material, and also being sustainable, and also including the feelings, emotions, and all these things from the community vulnerable community, and also guidelines on how to present it correctly to broader community, international community who are not directly involved in the conflict, how to interpret it correctly. So interpretation. And for businesses, so what kind of entrepreneurs this can be? This may be, again, cultural sector, this may be tourism sector for post-war, for instance. And I think this may be very efficient if, speaking about the toolkit, this may be very effective for the businesses and how to, first of all, present it, how to, first of all, understand how the, let's say, how the images will form their perception of the potential tourist even before they enter the post-war zone, and how when they are perceiving the documentary or war photography. It may help for festivals and exhibitions by presenting some, visualizing some results, for example, networks of war photographers, their decision-making process, their visitor codes, the checklist or guidelines for ethical considerations for doing this type of trips, if we may call them trips, on presenting these artifacts. So it is still raw, but I think these are very different sides on the effects.
Yeah, I think like for the, I think it's really excellent ideas you have there. I think for the like entrepreneurs, I think what you also showing is the importance of including this type of film or understanding, and I think that's what you can give them in terms of when they're setting up events, etc., or curating like their festivals, the importance of having this lens or this voice, and that's going to come from the academic rigor of your research. So you can see how the research is being translated from your sort of theoretical aim, if that's what we want to call it, to something which can be used by entrepreneurs, or you can bid for funding from entrepreneurs or for policymakers. Yeah, excellent. Thank you. You 10.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. I'm a PhD student, and let's go straight. My study investigates how to effectively apply artificial intelligence in heritage hotels while maintaining tourist perceived authenticity. And this research examines both hotel operational and the tourist behaviors. Working with the heritage hotels and the group chains and relevant associations, I aim to provide a unique solution that helps evaluate the appropriate implication of AI technologies in these settings. And finally, my contribution seeks to strike a balance between AI application, deployment, and the preservation of the authenticity, enhancing both the operational efficiency and the revenue performance for hotels, as well as improving the immersive experience from the tourist viewpoint. So that is my example.
Yeah. Heritage Hotel on authenticity and technology, they like pulling at each other, isn't
yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So I think, you have some great concept there in terms of how you can translate that into use for policy, but also use for entrepreneurs, because again, if you're invested in hotels, it's, and especially if you're going to invest in heritage hotel, you're thinking about the high-tech, high-touch personalization. You can show them how they can still maintain that authenticity, but still have the technology to help them with other aspects. So yeah, definitely I can see the translation from, the different, the same aim but being translated for different audiences. Excellent. Thank you. Sandra.
Hi, good afternoon. I really appreciate this section because I'm just starting my PhD, and my PhD topic is around motivation and how the motivation behind older tourists repeat visits to a familiar holiday destination. So my aim, I'm trying to critically explore the motivation that drives silver tourists, which I don't call them older tourists, I call them silver tourists, to undertake repeat visit to familiar holiday destination and to explore how this motivation shape their decision-making process. The reason why I am doing this is to understand the interrelation process that contribute to their psychological and emotional well-being in their later life. And this finding of the study may direct the creation of more inclusive and emotionally sensitive tourism practice that suit the requirements and preference of silver tourists, and also build a conceptual framework that explains the motivation, behavioral and meaning-based dimension of repeat visitation among older tourists.
Exciting there, Sandra. So again, you could definitely see translations for policymakers and for entrepreneurs. For entrepreneurs, as you know, the simple question, my research will let you know how you can attract more silver tourists. Because you're showing the qualities or the dimensions of it, and definitely for policymakers in terms of the segmentation of the tourist market. So yeah, really excellent ideas. There's two things I want to show you all, which I mentioned when I was going through the PowerPoint. Sorry, Maria,
Alisha,
you had your hand up. Did you want to contribute a name?
Not today, but thank you for the offer. I just wanted to draw your attention to some of the discussion on the chat. Follow up from Dimitri and something from Francis as well. So another.
Okay. Oh, discussion brought clarity to DBA policy. Yep. Excellent. Excellent, Pamamadi. That is such a good question, Dimitri. I think I always go back to what are the common tools that connect us in terms of the shared understanding. So I think it's you have to. This is where rewriting the same aim for different audiences works, because if you're looking at SMEs, if you're looking at chain hotels, if you're looking at different management structure in the hotel industry, they all have different priorities. So it's about finding out what everybody's priorities are and then linking it back to that aim, because they will have the same priorities at the end of the day, but they're thinking about it quite differently, or the wording is quite different. That's why I think the language is quite important in terms of, are you speaking the same language as policymakers? Are you speaking the same language as the industry? Because then they get buy-in for your messages a lot greater. One of the things I try to do more now is to go also every year to an industry conference in addition to an academic conference. Because again, that helps me to understand what are some of the key opportunities happening for industry, and then how I can start to shape my research to be able to address that. So that would be some of my tips for you in terms of how you try to connect these broader groups. But I think it's also in terms of how you disseminate the toolkit. So which platforms you're using to disseminate the toolkit. So again, one of the, think about the professional bodies as a way to reach the industry. Think about, the type of magazines, the trade press that hotelier reads. What do hoteliers engage with? So then how do they get insights in terms of your work? So I think it's trying to understand the lens of your user or your community or your audience in terms of where they're going to reach for information, and making sure your information is part of that would be my recommendation.
So if I understand from what you're suggesting, is from a strategic perspective, is identifying what potential channels would be the most ideal, compatible to reach the audience that is more likely to respond to what is that I want them to read, learn, or contribute.
Yes, definitely.
I don't want to monopolize the conversation. It's just because the industry is very, very fragmented. Small, medium, and large enterprise, they do have a really different variety of aim and objective in terms of how they want to carry out their businesses. In your experience, you say you are going to you try to attend industry conferences. Have you experienced the other way around, where the industry is coming towards, and I'm not just saying the odd guest speakers, but have you experienced where industry is engaging deeply with higher education? So it's not higher education going to the industry, but industry going to higher education. And if you ever you mentioned conference where you're going to, where would industry come to if they want to engage with what sort of platforms?
So I think a good starting point might be to reach out to well, I would call it our business development team at our university. There might be different names for it at your university, but at the university where I work at, we do have days where the industry come in. And, they bring with them, key sort of challenges. They send ahead like things that are opportunities before, and then we match them up with academics to work with them in terms of that, which can be developed into a KTP or other types of support. It could be short-term support, long-term support. So I think you must have like a business engagement or knowledge exchange department, which is proactively working with industry. And I think that would be a good starting point, because like in, I think, health sciences, etc., they call it like AIM days, where they come in, they talk about, different opportunities for research and collaboration to work together. So yes, I think it is a two-way, and I've seen it happen two ways, where the industry do come in, because because we have all of these grand challenges and all of these big industrial, challenges on our hands right now. I think they are very receptive to collaborating with us, but being mindful that they're also busy. So it's thinking about how, we form that synergy. So the more we can prep them ahead, what are some of the opportunities in organizations, already match them up to start to work through that, could be quite useful. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I just want to share two things that I mentioned whilst I was chatting. Let me share my screen here. Can you all see the screen, octopus? Yeah, let me make it a bit bigger. So this is linked to the UK government area of research interests, where you can publish your research. Again, it could just be an abstract, or you can see what research has been published, and then you can browse by department. So again, if we type, AI, let's see what we have here, publications. Again, we can filter, but there's so many things which have been published on AI. You can search by method, you can search by research problem, but again, it links back to this other thing I was talking about, which is the areas of research interest which the government are interested in. So again, it's quite good to look at the areas of research interest database. So you can, type in AI, you can see what comes up. And again, they tell you, what's happening. You can type in sustainability. You can see what's coming up in terms of what has been addressed, what they're looking for. So this is a good starting point to help you start to think about, how you start to engage with policy, see what are the sort of areas of research interest. Just because something isn't directly in your field doesn't mean it's not an area of research interest. Is sort of having to have a read about it, because we all fit into the industrial strategy and all of these areas that we're looking at. So these are just two, I think, useful sites to keep your eye on in terms of, what's happening in terms of government, in terms of the octopus, as well as in terms of the areas of research interest.
Alisha, are you able to pop in the links to these two websites in our chat? Would that be possible?
Yeah, I could do that now, actually.
And please let me know when you would like us to stop recording, because the recording is still on.
Yeah. I'll just share the other one, the octopus, and then we can stop recording, because that brings me to the end of today's session. And I want to say thank you so much for your time and your sharing and your questions. It's been a pleasure to be here today with you all.
Thank you
Dimitri.
very much, Alisha.
Pardon me, one final question.